Archie, do we really need an emergency fund after we retire?
Well, let's pay that a visit. I'm Archie Hoxton.
And I'm Rob Hoxton.
And this is Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. Welcome to Last Paycheck. Today, we're going to be talking about emergency funds.
Love it. Everybody loves emergency funds.
And the big question is, do you still need one after you retire?
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much for most people a kind of a no-brainer that you need an emergency fund while you're working. If something comes along, you lose your job, you get a temporary disability, whatever it is, a huge expense comes up, you want to have some emergency savings. But what about that time when you've already saved everything you need to save? You're ready to retire. You're living on Social Security, maybe a pension and investments. Do you still need one?
I think you do. And here's the thing. So it's particularly difficult when you're in a market like the one we've had. Now it's July of 2023, and we're on the tail end, hopefully, of a tough bear market, and the stock market's performed quite well this year. And so, the questions that we're getting are, do I need to have just money in a cash savings? And it's true that savings accounts are paying more now as well.
Right.
But I'd really like to have this money invested because the market's going up. Well, I don't know that that's always such a good idea. I'm a big believer in having that emergency fund because, as you said, Archie, you can have any number of things. I mean, you don't have to worry about losing your job if you're retired, but you may have an opportunity to do something nice for the grandkids, or maybe you want to set aside some money for education or whatever. It's good to have that emergency fund because the market can change really quickly. Selling in a down market is never a good thing, so having that buffer of an emergency fund is helpful.
Right, and if you have an unusually large event that takes place that's really expensive, you need to take a large distribution, you could be pigeonholed into incurring more taxes than you would ordinarily need to, than if you just have some cash handy and ready to go. You could have to take it out of an IRA. You could have to incur capital gains from selling some stocks. And that could have adverse effects on your tax situation. It could even bump you into a higher bracket.
Or it could make you have to pay more in Medicare premiums, right? If it affects your IRMA and all of a sudden now for the next 2 years you're paying more in Medicare premiums, that's kind of like a slap you from the back of the head sort of realization sometimes.
Right, and that's a little known fact too.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people are surprised by that, and yet another reason why it's important to have that. Another reason why some people will have a larger emergency fund in retirement, potentially even than when they were working, is maybe this is a way to manage your own risk tolerance, right? So you could have your portfolio that's doing the work of compounding, but maybe you've got a larger emergency fund that's there for those bear markets. Maybe it's a couple years worth of expenses or a year. It's long enough to outlast a bear market so that, when your stock and bond positions have fallen in value, you don't have to touch them.
That's a great point because, up until last year, it had been a long time since we had seen a bear market in bonds. And last year, I've seen research that would suggest that this was the worst bear market for bonds since the 1800s, right? So a lot of times people would say, well, I want to keep my investments invested. I don't really want to have a lot of money in a cash savings or emergency fund. Because if the stock market goes down, I can always pull from bonds. I could always sell some bonds. Well, that wouldn't have worked last year, certainly.
Right.
So it's interesting. I had a review meeting with one of our larger clients this morning, and he's super sort of strategic about everything he does. That's one of the reasons he's pretty well off, I guess. But he doesn't much care for investing in bonds. He's got a little bit in municipal bonds. He earns a lot of money, so he's in a high tax bracket. He's not retired yet. And I was like, hey, you've got a lot of money in interest-bearing money markets. Now, granted, the interest rate on it is like 5.3% right now, which is pretty attractive, even higher than the current inflation rate. But I said, what's your thinking here? And he said, look, I know I've been doing this long enough that I know every 3 or 4 years we're going to have a bear market in stocks. I want to have some extra cash on the sideline, so if I need money, I'm not selling at a bad time. I kind of want to have 2 to 3 years worth of living expenses. And then the rest of my portfolio, I'm going to be pretty aggressive.
Right.
So he has mostly stocks, some alternative investments, hedge funds, and the sort. But his way of addressing risk is by having enough cash to live on for a while. And, it helps that interest rates are higher right now.
Right. Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily need to, in this case, be an emergency fund. Then it's more like a slush fund that you have there to manage your risk and, take more risk in your portfolio. That might not be right for everybody, though, right? He's a large client. He's got a lot to work with. In the event, if that portfolio were a lot smaller, it probably still makes sense to manage risk using bonds. But it's still, again, there's still value in that emergency fund, especially if you're someone who, like so many of us, struggle with the ups and downs of the market. There's nothing like cash to give you a little bit of sense of security so that when the temptation strikes to turn your whole portfolio into cash, which would be just devastating to your long-term results, you say, all right, well, I've got enough here to get me through.
I can ride this out.
Yeah, I can ride this out. Bear markets don't last very long. They don't last nearly as long as bull markets historically. So if you can have a little there, and again, the other thing, you want to have an emergency fund for the same reason in retirement that you would while you're working, in that you don't want to blow up your retirement plan, right? If you've got a goal that you're working for and a problem arises that's expensive, you don't want to take money away from your goal while you're working to deal with that expense.
So let's assume everybody that's watching and listening is now convinced to have an emergency fund. What kind of investments, I say loosely, investments should they hold? I mean, should it be savings? Should it be CDs, treasuries? What really makes sense right now?
I think part of that is going to depend, again, there's a little bit of risk decision making that takes place there. The most liquid you can find are going to be money markets, high yield savings accounts, checking accounts. Checking accounts, you might as well get a little extra interest through high yield savings. If you're comfortable locking up money for a little bit longer, if your emergency fund is a lot larger, then maybe a CD or a CD ladder might work. Just knowing that you might have to take a loss on it if you.
And those CDs, if you're getting them from a local community bank, we like community banks, of course. Yeah. We're community guys, but we like community banks. If you get it from your local community bank, sometimes you can get it. So even though you're locking your money up for, say, 12 months, a portion of your money, sometimes they have like a one free withdrawal type thing. You just need to ask, and that's negotiated on the front end. And we usually recommend laddering these types of instruments, whether they be CDs or treasuries. If you get them through your brokerage firm, the value of those instruments will fluctuate from day to day. Right. And but what is that you're going to get par, the face value of the instrument when it reaches maturity.
Right.
So, but yeah, you've got to recognize that if you're just in money market funds and you have more than $250,000 in savings, not all of it's going to be protected by FDIC insurance.
Right.
So you want to be mindful of that. And then if you look at what the yield curve looks like right now, there's not a whole lot of benefit for going long and getting those longer maturities. And plus, if it's an emergency fund, you really don't want to be more than, say, 12 months. You want to have some stuff that's totally liquid right now, some that's liquid soon, and maybe some that's a little bit later, I would say. Right. But it could be CDs, treasuries, savings, high yield savings, and such.
Right. And it's important to keep in mind with investments and instruments like that, you're locking up your money for a longer period of time. There's liquidity risk. You should be, proportionately rewarded for that risk. So when we say the yield curve is inverted, we mean longer term is paying less. And so you're taking more risk and you're getting less back. So that's something important to keep in mind. Look for the best rate that you can find within that time frame that's accessible for emergencies, and keep in mind that risk, especially if we're talking about a brokered CD or a treasury bond or something.
Since we're talking about this, this idea of having really deliberate savings and what types of instruments to use for that. It wasn't very many months ago that we had the failure of a couple of really big banks. Mm-hmm. Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic and a couple of others, Credit Suisse. And they had to be essentially rescued by either the government or larger banks. Right. And so it's really odd that now we're in a position where we're like, maybe if I have more than $250,000 in a depository account that's protected by FDIC insurance up to $250,000, maybe I don't really have to worry that much anyway. Same conversation I was having this morning with this larger client who has so much in an emergency fund. It's all in a high yield savings, and I said, are you concerned about the fact that only the first $250K is protected by FDIC insurance? And he was like, no, this I'm pretty sure the government's going to bail us out if this happens. So they're going to bail us out until they don't. So our recommendation, of course, is to buy multiple instruments, ladder them in such a way that you are fully protected with FDIC insurance on your cash.
Right. Most of us, our memories don't go so far back as 1929, but
no, mine does actually.
Okay. But if you were there and if you've talked to someone who was there, they're keenly aware of that risk and the importance of FDIC insurance. So it is something to think about and make sure that you're protected, because who knows, there could be a day where the government doesn't bail out, and if you had more than was insured, then that's just the way it is, and it's unfortunate. But
I suspect that the government's going to raise that 250 limit, and the reason that they should is because if they're going to provide coverage, sort of de facto coverage over 250, they need to at least be charging the banks premiums for providing that coverage. So I would expect to see that limit per account registration rise, and if for no other reason than because the government and the politicians have realized that they're going to have to backstop the banks even over the FDIC limit. So let's make sure that the government gets paid a premium for doing that. So I would expect to see that coming down the pike. Politics being what it is, who knows how long. But
yeah, you never know. The point is, if you haven't gathered, emergency funds are really important throughout your entire life, and how you structure it, how you build it. It could be really simple or it could be more complicated depending on your risk. It's important to stay informed as you're making those decisions. But, we're coming up on time here. We hope this has been really valuable to you. Thank you for listening and joining us as always. We love to hear from everyone, so please drop a question in the comments. We will get back to you and answer that question.
We might even use it in an episode. Of course, we'll protect your identity. But
Right. Yeah. So thank you. And again, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We hope you keep listening, like and subscribe, and share with your friends. Thanks. You've been watching Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. If you like this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Last Paycheck is available anywhere you get your podcasts.